What is the most terrifying invitation you could possibly receive? A letter from the tax office? A summons to appear in court? For the richest and most powerful men in 15th century Italy, it was something far more elegant and far more frightening. It was a simple handwritten invitation to attend dinner with the Pope. Because in the Rome of the Borgia family, a dinner invitation was not an honor, it was a threat. You think you know stories about crime families from movies and television, but you have never heard one like this. This is the story of a family that took over the Catholic Church and ran it like their own personal mafia enterprise. It was led by a pope who committed every sin in the book, and commanded by a son so ruthless he literally became the definition of a monster. They did not use bullets or bombs to build their empire. They used something far more intimate, far more terrifying. A dinner table, a glass of wine, and a secret family recipe for murder. Prepare to uncover the truth about the Borgias, and the one catastrophic night their own evil plan backfired so spectacularly it destroyed their entire dynasty. This is the story of the deadliest dinner party in history. To understand the terror, you must first meet the players. You must meet the unholy trinity that held Rome in a grip of fear. At the head of the table sat Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia. This was not a man of God. He was a wolf disguised as a shepherd. He bribed, cheated, and conspired his way to the papacy, the highest office in the Christian world. But he saw his holy power not as a tool for salvation, but as a bank account to fund his children's insatiable ambitions. He threw legendary parties in the Vatican itself, celebrations so filled with debauchery that the details would make a sailor blush. He was the godfather, but he wore holy vestments instead of a pinstripe suit. If the Pope was the godfather, his favorite son was the enforcer. His name was Cesare Borgia. He was handsome, brilliant, charming, and utterly without a soul. He was originally made a cardinal by his father, but he quickly traded his red robes for armor to become one of the most feared military commanders in Europe. But his true genius was not on the battlefield. It was in the shadows. He perfected the art of the political assassination with a chilling creativity. You do not learn this in most history classes, but Cesare once invited a group of his own captains, men who had defied him, to the city of Sinigaglia for what he called a peace negotiation. It was a lie. He welcomed them with smiles and hugs, shared wine with them, and by the end of the night had every single one of them seized and strangled to death. He was the living embodiment of the phrase "trust no one." He was so famously treacherous that he became the direct inspiration for Machiavelli's infamous book, The Prince, the ultimate handbook on how to rule through fear. And caught between this monstrous father and son was Lucrezia Borgia. History has painted her as a wicked femme fatale, a woman who would poison her lovers with a smile. But the shocking truth is that she was likely her family's first victim. She was the beautiful bait in their political games. Her father and brother married her off for the first time when she was just 13 years old to secure an alliance. When that alliance was no longer useful, they had the marriage annulled under false pretenses. Her second husband, who she genuinely loved, was hunted down and brutally attacked by Cesare's men. When he survived the initial assault, Cesare reportedly burst into his room as he recovered and had him finished off, declaring, "What is not done at noon can be done at dinner." Lucrezia was a chess piece, moved around a board of power and murder, her life defined by the ambitions of the men who controlled her. This family had a signature move, a method of murder so infamous it became a legend whispered in every court in Europe. It was all about the dinner party. Imagine the scene. You are a wealthy cardinal. You have lands, riches, and influence, which means you are a target. You receive the invitation. You cannot refuse because to insult the Pope is political suicide. So you go. You sit in a lavishly decorated room, surrounded by beautiful art, listening to beautiful music. The Pope himself, the supposed representative of God on earth, smiles at you and personally pours you a glass of wine. Your heart pounds in your chest. Is this a simple gesture of fellowship? Or is this your execution? To refuse the glass is a mortal insult. To accept it is a gamble with your life. The Borgias were masters of this psychological warfare. The fear was part of the weapon. Their ultimate secret, their masterpiece of death, was a poison known as cantarella. The exact recipe is lost to history, but it was believed to be a complex derivative of arsenic, refined into a fine white powder. It was the perfect weapon. It was completely tasteless, colorless, and odorless. A tiny, undetectable pinch could be dusted onto a piece of fruit or stirred into a chalice of wine. The effects were diabolical. The poison would not act immediately. Hours or even days later, the victim would begin to suffer from violent stomach cramps, a burning fire in their throat, and horrific convulsions. To outside observers and even to most doctors of the time, the symptoms looked identical to dysentery or other common illnesses. The victim would die a slow, agonizing death, and no one would officially suspect a thing. It was the perfect crime, and the Borgias turned it into a brutal business model. They would identify a wealthy cardinal who stood in their way or who possessed castles and fortunes they coveted. They would host a beautiful feast. The cardinal would fall mysteriously ill days later, and after his tragic death, the Pope would seize all of his assets in the name of the Church, assets which were then funneled directly to Cesare to fund his armies. They were systematically murdering the leaders of their own church, one dinner party at a time. This brings us to the hot summer of 1503. The Borgias were at the height of their power, but their ambition was limitless. They needed more money. So they set their sights on their next target, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, the fabulously rich Cardinal Adriano Castellisi. The plan was classic Borgia. Simple, elegant, and deadly. They invited themselves to the cardinal's magnificent villa for dinner. Cesare's most trusted poison master prepared a bottle of wine laced with a lethal dose of cantarella. This bottle was to be brought to the dinner and served only to their host. Another, clean bottle would be brought for the Pope and his son. It was a plan they had executed flawlessly countless times before. There was no reason to think this time would be any different. But this time it was different. This is the moment where the story takes a turn that no screenwriter would dare invent. This is where cosmic justice decides to serve the final course. The Pope and his son Cesare arrived at the cardinal's villa before the dinner was set to begin. The August heat was stifling. Feeling thirsty from their journey, Pope Alexander called for a drink. A servant, a butler who was completely unaware of the murderous plot, rushed to obey the Pope's command. He saw the bottles of wine that had been set aside for the special dinner. Wanting to serve the very best to the Holy Father, he did not grab the ordinary table wine. He grabbed one of the special bottles. He grabbed the wrong one. Before anyone could stop him, he poured a generous glass for the Pope, and another for Cesare. The two master plotters, the geniuses of poison and political intrigue, drank deeply from the very wine they had intended for their victim. In a single moment of catastrophic incompetence, they had fallen into their own trap. They had poisoned themselves. The downfall was as swift as it was grotesquely horrific. The poison acted fast. Pope Alexander, being a man of nearly 70, stood no chance against the potent dose of cantarella. He was consumed from the inside out. His death was not peaceful. The horrified accounts of those who were there read like something from a horror novel. His body began to decompose at a supernatural speed, even before he had taken his final breath. It swelled and bloated to grotesque proportions, and the skin turned a sickening shade of purple-black, peeling away from the flesh beneath. The stench of rot was so immediate and so overwhelming that workers had to burn incense and flee the room just to escape it. When the time came for his burial, his corpse was so distended with gas that it no longer fit in its coffin. The attendants had to physically roll the body, punching and shoving the rotting, blackened remains with brute force just to cram them inside and nail the lid shut. The man who claimed to be God's holy representative on earth had rotted like a piece of meat, a victim of his own insatiable greed. Cesare, being young and inhumanly strong, fought a battle for his life that became a legend of body horror. The poison ravaged his body. He was consumed by a violent fever, and his skin reportedly peeled off in entire sheets, leaving raw flesh behind. In a desperate medieval attempt to break the fever, he supposedly had a bull disemboweled and had himself submerged in its steaming, bloody innards. He survived. But his power did not. Just as this disaster struck, the Borgias' greatest enemies were marching on Rome. But Cesare, the invincible general, was left a weak, broken invalid, writhing in agony in his bed. He was too sick to lead his armies. He was too sick to command his men. His empire, built on a decade of terror, poison, and murder, crumbled into dust in a matter of days. One clumsy pour of wine had accomplished what no army in Europe ever could. The deadliest dinner party in history had only two real victims: the hosts. The Borgia family was finished. Their story is a chilling, unforgettable reminder that those who live by poison shall, sooner or later, die by it. And that sometimes, the most elaborate and evil plans can be undone by the simplest of human mistakes. If you have a taste for the dark and disturbing truths that history tried to bury, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because there are so many more bodies to